Welcome to Legislative Watch, where public policy is openly discussed and elected officials are able to report their activities directly to the people, unfiltered and unbridled. I'm Elizabeth Allen Hodge, your host, and in the studio with me today is Vito Barbieri, first term from District 3, and Lenore Barrett, who's an old pro, 10th term, District 35. Old pro, I just should say a pro. All right. Well, these are both definitely friends of liberty, and they're in the forefront of the battle. So how goes the battle?
Well, we were talking earlier, that's the analogy, definitely. We really feel like we are in a war there, especially now. We're in March. We have another month to go, and the tax bills are coming fast and furious, and the agencies are coming in with their budgets expecting to be expanding, and so we're finding ourselves not only defending ourselves on the flanks, but also trying to be much more aggressive and offensive in terms of getting some of our own policies in there. And it's just a constant war.
You know, Lenore, you've been in this battle a long time. It's fun to have someone who's been in there 20 years and someone who's been in there 2 years, because you have different perspectives having come into it. I'd like both of you to think for a second and tell me what your thoughts were when you first got elected, what you envisioned your role being, and how you feel about it now, what you've come to learn about the process.
Well, I don't have to think for any particular amount of time. When I went into the legislature, I really thought, and I think one person can make a difference, but it's pretty hard. So it's nice when some of the young Turks come along to help you out a little bit. But I think I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be, because I'm very simple. You cut taxes, you stop growing government, and you reduce regulation. That's the first three things that I like to do or think I can do. But I got to tell you, in a Republican-dominated legislature, we even had a big old floor debate on cutting taxes. And that kind of, not only does the debate bore you to death, but it just kind of thinks, why are we here?
Well, you know, Judge Napolitano says we basically have one-party system. You know, you have two parties in it, but you have left and a right wing of the same party, because it doesn't feel like there's a dime's worth a dozen difference.
Doesn't seem to matter what the rhetoric is. The actions and the votes you still see moving toward bigger, more powerful government. We listen to arguments that well, this particular bill is not growing government at all. There's not one new employee but the power that we're granting the agency or the department is growing. So the worldview is so different in terms of how the perspective is that we must make sure that government survives. And I'm not saying that we don't need government. Of course we need government.
Yeah.
But to say that at all costs government must survive, we've got to make sure that we talked about a tax cut as though the government is, how are we going to pay for that tax cut? And that's just backwards. You know, how do you get the terminology, how do you get the conversation to the point that you're actually in that floor debate today, everyone used, whether they were pro or con, against this tax cut, they all talked about how we were giving back the money to the taxpayers, that we were paying for it. And
how are they giving it back to the taxpayers?
Well, that's the thing, is the taxpayers should be keeping it. But we're talking as though it's the government's money or our money, and we're going to give it back to them by not taking it. And so it's just it's a mindset, and the conversation needs to change, and that's, you know, my battle, I think, coming in very much the same. This is going to be a revolution. When I get there, the new people are going to cause this revolution to occur. And then you recognize that the institutional memory that Lenore and Joanne would have, this is so important for us to stop and take the time to see what has gone on in the past. How have things changed? Have they changed? And in many ways, they have not changed. The battles remain the same.
Well, in Representative Schaefer, who's been there a long time too, I went in with Representative Schaefer, and he's still there. And he talks about how when we first went in there, all of us kind of starry-eyed thinking this is going to be like our founding fathers, and you know, we're going to have debates and everything. But basically, we're all looking for a way to help people, to make sure that government's off their backs and that, you know, we have limited government. I can remember being told that I could pass any kind of legislation I wanted as long as I said that it was a free enterprise bill, even if it had nothing to do with free enterprise. I was also told that I could do anything that I wanted over there because my constituents would never know. For that kind of discussion to go on, it was very disillusioning at first, you know, certainly disconcerting. And the way you describe it, you feel like you're really you're entrenched, you're doing battle to protect the rights of your constituents.
Well, would you apply that to a constituency who was wrong?
Well,
they're not always right.
No, they're not.
But if you don't have your own principles,
right?
And everybody claims to have principles. Even Vito thinks he's principled.
It's true. I go around showing them on my lapel all the time.
If you don't have that core of strength, then you just kind of... The tax bill, what was the big... Oh, but it will deprive us of the revenue that we need to help everybody. What about the schools? We've, you know, not been fair with the school. Yes, we have. We're darn good to our schools. They just had all these excuses to not give a tax cut. And I can't believe that any Republican would even...
And yet, there they are. The statists continue with their rhetoric.
I like it when you talk about statists versus non-statists. Our old friend Ralph Smead,
yeah,
he was so wonderful at explaining that it isn't a Republican, a Democrat, it isn't a liberal and a conservative that's the problem, because you have statists in both parties, and statists are the people who want the state to control everything, who want more government control. Non-statists are more liberty-minded, and that's right. So it's an appropriate thing that you talk that way.
It's so true. The statists really think that a problem can be solved by passing a law, and that somehow, the texting bill is a perfect example, and I've said this before, let's see what happens in 20 years. They pass that texting bill and make it a misdemeanor to be texting while you're driving, and let's see what happens over the next 20 years as to whether or not they're more furtive now and more dangerous while they're, you know, hiding their texting, or how this really reacts. Not social engineering through passing laws, modifying behavior through passing laws. Will that work? Well, it's been, you know, that's the rhetoric.
Fine.
Yeah, that's the rhetoric it's been forever. So, you know, education could work there. I almost stood up today on the floor, and we're spending $6.1 billion a year. Now, that's not all Idaho money. Only $2.5 billion is Idaho money. The rest is all federal.
Only. Wow.
Only.
Federal.
And you're talking about billions. Billions of dollars. And at the same time, they can't allocate enough money to fix buildings, or they leave all that stuff to go. So that's why now you've got a great rationale for raising taxes, because you've got to repair. Well, why didn't you allocate that money for repair? So there's a lot of engineering going on, and it hasn't changed. I'm sure you can attest to that.
Well, the other thing that's bothered me, as long as we're talking along this line, is I think there is a lot of interest in state sovereignty. But we're never going to have state sovereignty as long as we let the federal government own our land. What else do
Control
they do?
our minds.
Control our...
You know,
they buy us. I mean, we want to be a sovereign state, but we want the federal government to keep funding us.
Well, there's certainly an entitlement mentality amongst a lot of people and politicians. And, you know, you were just saying, well, you know, helping people. Different people have their views of what helps people, right? We might think you're helping people by getting government off their back. by preserving their liberty and the rights that we know that are God-given and not granted by the Constitution but recognized. Somebody else might think, well, those people need certain things that we want to give to them.
One of the maddening things, and I was talking with Senator Steve Vick about this a few weeks back, is that even the conservative legislators who in one breath will espouse the need to limit government and to not continue to spend will make the exception for this particular one, however, and they'll argue for this exception. And if you can't hold the line, then all these little exceptions are what's bleeding the patient to death, if you don't mind the metaphor.
Well, and the principle is completely lost, because the principle is true no matter how it applies. I think that's probably the one thing that helped me when I would read a bill, even if it sounds like a good thing. I thought, what's the principle here? If it were applied to something else, would that be right? And that's not always easy
No, that's
either,
not always
is it?
easy. No, that's not always easy as well.
Well, I think, and I don't remember how many years ago, it seemed like it was when Senator Craig was still in Congress, they passed a bill that any bill that was created had to pass constitutional muster.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
And I think the same thing should happen down here at the State House. But we had one debate, and this went back last year, and I don't remember what the issue was. I got so caught up in the debate. And I stood up on the floor to make my 2 bits and said, you either believe in the Constitution or you don't. You either swear to uphold and defend the Constitution or you don't. Object. I got a big object from the other side of the aisle. Kind of caught me off guard.
Well, that would.
Yeah. And then, of course, the speaker, who is a wonderful speaker, I can't say enough about him, kind of put him off guard, and we finally resolved it, but it was a constitutional argument, which is why I started off the way I did. And I'll tell you, if you were sitting up there in the gallery, you would think this country had 2 constitutions. Constitution this, Constitution this. I almost left the floor. I got so...
Well, you know, the Congress, you were talking about not being able to pass bills unless it passed constitutional muster. They ignore that, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you pass over a 2,000-page bill that you haven't even read yet, and you have the Speaker of the House at the time, I think, saying, well, we have to pass this so we can read it and find out what's in it, I don't know how people continue to put up with that nonsense.
We did that with the streamlined
sales
I always
tax
want to
just
call
recently.
them the fast. The streamlined sales tax, and we don't have time to go into all the ins and outs of that, but that was a
79-page bill.
bill.
New language, legislative authority. Are we scooting
I'm
out
going to
here?
have to cut you off.
All right.
We'll be right back.